Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the sleepy sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow, who enjoys facts about the most overlooked corners of human history, and the way those facts linger in the dust of forgotten time. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in the quiet study of ancient art forms, especially those that no longer live in the world except as whispers in stone and pigment. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those few times when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it, because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please let me know, what is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode on the slow, patient world of Upper Paleolithic cave painting styles, which, if we are very honest, are not exactly fashionable dinner conversation anymore. And yet, here we are. When we speak of these paintings, we are not speaking of the modern-day artist in a warm, well-lit studio, but rather of a person, somewhere between 40,000 and 10,000 years ago, standing in the cool stillness of a cave, the air thick with the faint scent of crushed minerals and the deep silence of stone. These paintings, often hand stencils or naturalistic depictions of animals like bison or horses, were created using pigments drawn from minerals such as hematite for red, manganese oxide for black, and kaolin for white. The application was not always with a brush, but sometimes by blowing the powdered pigment through a hollow bone, so that the color would settle softly on the rock surface, clinging to it like a whisper from another age. The styles varied by region. The Franco-Cantabrian caves of what is now France and Spain showing a surprising depth of shading, while in Eastern Europe, the figures could be simpler, more abstract, perhaps reflecting differences in both culture and available materials. Let us drift, ever so slowly, to consider the texture of the rock itself. For it was not an empty canvas, but a surface that shaped the image. Ripples and bulges in the limestone becoming the shoulder of an aurochs, or the curve of a reindeer's flank. The choice of location deep inside a cave, far from daylight, means that these artists worked by flickering firelight, which would make the painted figure seem to move, to breathe. Though perhaps that was not the point. Or perhaps it was. This fact is not exciting. Not even a little bit. And that is just perfect. Because in the quietness of these images, in the still patience of minerals on stone, there is a kind of unchangingness, a reminder that these pigments have clung for tens of thousands of years, longer than most things we call permanent. They sit in the quiet vault of history, these Venus figurines, no larger than a hand, yet holding an entire era's symbolic weight. Carved between 25,000 and 23,000 years ago, in the cold and wind-worn landscapes of Upper Paleolithic Europe, they were shaped from materials that were both precious and enduring. Mammoth ivory, soft stone like limestone or steatite, even bone worn smooth by countless years. Their forms are often rounded, exaggerated, and stylized: broad hips, pronounced breasts, small or absent faces, details that may have been symbolic rather than literal. Some scholars think they represented fertility, survival, or the cycles of life, while others see them as tokens of identity or shared belief among scattered communities. The carvings were portable, designed to be carried through a migratory world. Their surfaces smoothed by both deliberate polishing and the slow touch of time. Let us float gently onward, to consider the way they were made, the careful incising of lines with flint tools, the soft abrading of surfaces with sandstone, the minute attention to proportions that suggests a practiced eye. Their creators lived without metal, without pottery, yet still devoted hours to shaping something that served no direct practical purpose. That choice alone whispers of a mind seeking more than survival. In their smallness, they hold an immensity of stillness, like a pause caught in the middle of an ice-age breath. Some thousands of years later, in the lands of the Levant, the Nachfian culture left behind a different kind of quiet mark. Stone tools and objects incised with fine, deliberate patterns, emerging around 12,000 BCE. These were a people on the cusp of profound change, still hunter-gatherers, yet experimenting with settled life, harvesting wild cereals, and building the earliest known stone houses. Their decorated stones, often made from limestone or basalt, bore lines, dots, and geometric motifs, carved not for utility but for expression. The incisions were shallow, often rhythmic in spacing, perhaps intended to please the eye or the mind in moments of rest. Let us drift, ever so slowly, to imagine the work itself: a small stone held steady in one hand, a microlith flake in the other, pressing and scraping with controlled movements that required patience more than strength. Some of these stones might have been used as tools, others as amulets or decorative objects. And in their repetition of pattern there is something soothing, almost meditative. Like ripples spreading on a still pond, their marks echo across millennia, too faint to shout, yet too deliberate to vanish entirely. In another soft corner of prehistory, around 9000 BCE, the earliest woven plant fiber textiles appeared in the Levant and Anatolia, fragile works whose bodies have long since returned to dust, leaving only ghostly impressions in clay or traces of fibers preserved in charred remains. They were not yet loom woven, but twined and plain woven by hand, the fibers likely drawn from flax, reeds, or other local plants. The work began with stripping, soaking, and beating the fibers until they separated into long, pliable strands, then twisting them into thread with nothing more than a spindle and patient fingers. Let us take a slow little detour, to imagine the sound, barely there, of thread rubbing against thread, the faint rustle of drying stalks in the breeze outside. These cloths may have been mats, bags, or garments, their patterns simple but functional, each intersection of warp and weft a tiny knot in the great, slow weaving of human skill. No one thought of them as remarkable at the time. Yet here we are, reconstructing their existence from indirect traces, proof that even in the earliest days of settled life, people sought softness, warmth, and the quiet structure of fabric. By around 7000 BCE, in the hills and valleys of Anatolia and the Near East, hands were shaping clay into vessels using early coiling techniques. These pots were not yet spun on a wheel, the wheel was still centuries away, but instead built slowly, coil by coil, the strips of clay smoothed together until the vessel rose in quiet spirals. The firing was low and uneven, in open hearths or simple pits, leaving the surfaces sometimes smoky, sometimes patchily colored. To make them smoother, potters used burnishing stones to polish the clay before firing, and sometimes a slip, a watery mixture of finer clay, was applied to give a softer sheen. Let us drift into the thought of such a vessel. Heavy in the hands, smelling faintly of earth, holding water or grain, and bearing the subtle marks of the fingers that made it. In their making is an unhurried conversation between human intention and the slow drying of clay, a conversation we can still hear, if only we listen gently enough. In the warm valleys and uplands of Anatolia and the Caucasus, around 6500 BC, hands were at work with a kind of precision that leaves no room for haste. Obsidian, that glassy volcanic stone sharper than a razor, was flaked into microblades so small and delicate that their making must have required a stillness in the body and a focus in the eyes. These fragments, sometimes no longer than a fingernail, were set into grooves in bone or wood to create decorative inlays, lines, chevrons, or tiny repeating patterns that caught the light with a soft, dark gleam. Let us drift, very slowly, into the thought of such a piece, a smooth handle or ornament, cool to the touch, its tiny insets fitted so perfectly that no gap could be felt. The work was not purely for beauty, nor purely for utility, it was the meeting of both, where the maker's pride in the detail became as important as the object's function. The rarity of this craft in later times speaks to its demanding nature. A single slip of the hand could ruin hours of effort, and the obsidian itself had to be traded or quarried from distant sources, carried over land by those who valued its sharpness and shine. As centuries passed, in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia around 6000 BC, people began to shape meaning out of clay, not into vessels or figurines, but into small tokens, each one a quiet statement of quantity or kind. These were the incised clay tokens, a pre-writing system where form and surface combined into a language of record-keeping long before ink and parchment existed. A sphere might represent livestock, a disc could mean grain, and incised lines added further distinctions. Let us take a slow little detour. To picture a handful of these tokens in the palm, their edges smoothed by touch, their marks pressed in while the clay was still damp, each one dried in the air until firm. They could be stored together in a clay envelope, sometimes sealed and broken open later, like a silent archive. Their artistry was subtle, patterns and textures that were as much about communication as ornament, and in their modest way they carried the seeds of written history. By about 3500 BC, in Sumer, the seal replaced the token as the mark of identity. Cylinder seals, small, rounded stones carved with intaglio designs, were rolled across wet clay to leave a continuous impression, like a miniature tapestry unfolding. The carving itself was delicate work, often showing narrative scenes of gods, animals, and human figures in stylized poses. Each line had to be cut in reverse, so that the impression would read correctly, a mental exercise requiring both patience and spatial skill. Let us float gently onward. To imagine the seal pressed against the clay of a jar stopper, a contract tablet, or a storage room door, leaving behind a trail of tiny, crisp figures that no one could easily replicate. They were more than tools, they were the personal signatures of their time, objects of beauty that could be worn as jewelry, handled daily, and passed down through generations, their stories locked in the grooves until pressed into clay again. In the floodplains of the Nile by 3300 BC, Egyptian craftsmen were experimenting with something different, not stone, not clay, but faience, a sintered quartz paste glazed in brilliant blue-green tones, shimmering like the waters of the Nile in sunlight. The process involved alkali salts that, when heated, drew a glassy layer to the surface without the need for a separate glaze coat. Beads, amulets, tiles, and small figurines emerged from kilns with colors so vivid they still glow today. A gentle pause. To picture an amulet in the palm, smooth yet faintly gritty, its hue somewhere between turquoise and the fresh green of spring reeds. The making of faience was both chemistry and artistry, grinding quartz, mixing it with natron or plant ash, shaping, drying, and firing in a way that encouraged the self-glazing reaction. Though imitated in later times, the earliest techniques remain elusive, and the quiet magic of their colors belongs to a world that no longer exists. By 3000 BC, across the ancient Near East and into the Indus Valley, artisans were learning to cast bronze using the lost wax method, cire perdue, a process that allowed for forms far more intricate than simple hammered metal. A model was sculpted in wax, coated in clay, and then heated so the wax melted away, leaving a hollow mold. Into this space, molten bronze was poured, cooling into delicate shapes with thin walls, ready to be polished or engraved. Let us wander slowly through the thought of such work, the glow of the furnace, the slow ladling of metal, the tense quiet while it cooled. Every casting was unique, the mold broken to free the piece, so each small figurine or ornament was a singular creation. Over time, the process evolved, but the earliest examples still hold a soft, ancient elegance, each one a captured moment in the long conversation between fire, metal, and human patience. In the quiet urban landscapes of the Indus Valley around 2600 BC, small squares of steatite were carved with an attentiveness that seemed to compress whole worlds into a surface barely larger than a thumb. These stamp seals bore geometric arrangements, abstract symbols, and finely rendered animals, often a humped bull, an elephant, or a mysterious one-horned creature. The lines were incised with tools fine enough to create whiskers, fur textures, and horn ridges, each stroke deliberate. The seals were likely pressed into soft clay to mark goods or documents, their impressions as precise as their carvings. Yet the meaning of the script-like symbols that often accompanied the animals remains undeciphered, a gentle puzzle that has resisted every attempt to read it. Let us float gently onward. To imagine one such seal resting in the palm, smooth from polishing, cool from stone, its designs both decorative and purposeful. The act of carving into steatite required heat hardening afterward to make the surface durable, so each seal passed through the slow stages of shaping, smoothing, engraving, and baking, an unhurried process that left little room for error, but much for care. In the dry desert air of Egypt's Fayum region, around 2,500 years later, portrait painters worked with a medium that even now feels both rich and fragile, encaustic wax. On thin wooden panels, faces were rendered with naturalistic depth, the warm browns of skin, the deep gloss of dark eyes, the faint blush of cheeks, all built up in pigmented beeswax. This method required heating the wax until it flowed like honey, then brushing, layering, and sometimes scraping it into shape before it cooled. Let us take a slow little detour to consider how this paint, once soft and molten, hardened to a surface that could endure 2 millennia, preserving the likenesses of people who have long since turned to dust. These Fayum portraits often adorned mummies in Roman Egypt, merging Greek-influenced realism with Egyptian funerary tradition. Each panel was both an intimate likeness and a public declaration of identity, yet painted with the same quiet, meditative patience that the medium demanded. Far to the Aegean, on the island of Crete around 2000 BC, Minoan fresco painters worked in palatial rooms, applying pigments to wet plaster so that the color fused into the wall itself. This true buon fresco technique required swift, sure strokes before the plaster dried, yet the overall effect is one of lightness and flow, graceful dolphins swimming through blue, saffron gatherers bending over blossoms, acrobats vaulting over bowls. Let us drift, ever so slowly, into the thought of such work, where mineral pigments like ochre and cinnabar were ground to fine powder, mixed with water, and laid upon the still damp lime. The chemical reaction between pigment and plaster locked the images into the wall, allowing them to survive in fragments for thousands of years. Even in their damage, the colors still hold a luminous softness, a trace of the sunlit world they once depicted. In Anatolia and the Near East around 1800 BCE, metalworkers discovered the intricate pleasure of damascening, setting thin patterns of gold or silver into the surface of bronze. This early form involved cutting fine grooves into the bronze, placing the softer precious metal into them, and hammering it gently so that it locked into place. The result was a contrast of deep, warm bronze and bright, reflective lines or shapes, sometimes forming patterns of leaves, scrolls, or geometric motifs. Let us wander slowly into the workshop in our thoughts, the ring of hammer on metal, the gleam of gold thread-like against the darker base, the patient repetition of each inlay. It was work as much about feel as sight, the craftsman knowing by the smallest vibration when the inlay had seated perfectly in its groove. By 1500 BC, the Mycenaeans in Greece were shaping gold so thin it could ripple at the edge of a breath, hammering it over carved forms to create repoussé reliefs. This technique pushed the metal outward from behind, forming patterns of lions, spirals, or floral designs, sometimes further enriched with granulation, tiny spheres of gold fused to the surface without solder. A soft pause. To imagine such a piece in the light, every detail catching a glint, yet weighing almost nothing. These works, found in tombs, were not merely adornments, they were quiet statements of wealth and skill, made by hands that could coax a lifeless sheet of metal into something that seemed to breathe under the eyes. In the quiet forests and rocky coastlines of ancient Scandinavia, around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age people left their stories etched deep into stone, large-scale petroglyphs carved by the steady rhythm of pecking and grinding tools. These rock panels often feature elongated ships, figures engaged in mysterious rituals, and scenes that, to us now, seem like shadows of a long-forgotten language. The ships, sometimes stretching several meters in length, carry silent witnesses of voyages across fjords and seas, their carved lines worn soft by millennia of wind and rain. Let us float gently onward into the image of a person, perhaps a shaman, using stone tools to patiently chip away at the granite, removing tiny flakes with each strike, the sound a soft tapping echoing in stillness. The choice of location for these petroglyphs was deliberate, on cliffs, near waterways, places where the spirit of the land might mingle with human intent. The grinding smoothed some of the rough edges, leaving behind patterns that shimmer faintly in the shifting light of day, like whispered stories waiting to be heard. This tradition, both art and ritual, was woven into the fabric of Bronze Age life, marking moments too important for mere words. Moving south to the rolling hills of ancient Italy, about a couple of centuries later, the Etruscans perfected a special kind of pottery known as bucchero. This blackware pottery was unlike most others because it gleamed with a polished, burnished surface, created in what is called a reducing atmosphere, a firing technique that limits oxygen in the kiln to turn the clay a deep, matte black. The clay itself was finely prepared, often mixed with tiny iron particles that reacted during firing to produce this signature darkness. Let us drift, ever so slowly, through the potter's workshop, where jars, bowls, and cups are shaped on slow wheels or by hand, then carefully polished with smooth stones or cloth before the slow, smoky fire draws out their final form. This technique required not only skill but also patience. The difference between an oxygen-rich fire and a reducing one meant the kiln had to be monitored and tended with care. Bucchero pottery was not only functional but also a symbol of Etruscan identity, their shiny black vessels gracing tables and tombs alike, before the tradition gradually waned as Roman influence grew. The subtle variations in shape and decoration speak of a culture both proud and deliberate. In the age of city-states and philosophers, around 700 BCE in ancient Greece, vase painters moved beyond mere decoration to create stories in silhouette and color on ceramics. The red figure technique, which allowed for more detailed brush lines, replaced the older black figure style, letting mythic narratives unfold with delicate precision. Figures such as gods, heroes, and animals emerged with fluidity and life, their muscles and drapery hinted at through fine strokes that brought the scenes closer to naturalism. Let us take a slow little detour to watch the painter's brush, dipped in a refined slip, tracing out a warrior's spear or the folds of a goddess's robe on the still soft surface of a pot. After firing, the contrasting red of the clay against the black background made these scenes glow with a quiet drama. While many sub-styles appeared and disappeared over centuries, each piece was both a functional vessel and a canvas of cultural storytelling, echoing the values and beliefs of its people in gentle, unhurried narratives. Across the mountains and deserts of Persia around 600 BC, master goldsmiths and early Zoroastrian workshops practiced the delicate art of filigree and granulation. Here, fine threads of gold or silver were twisted into lace-like patterns, tiny spheres painstakingly attached without solder to create surfaces that shimmered like frozen sunlight. Let us float gently onward. Into the workshop, where hands steady as stone place minute beads of metal, using heat and subtle pressure, assembling ritual objects meant to bridge the human and the divine. The exact recipes and techniques of these ancient artisans have largely been lost, their knowledge passed through time like a whispered secret in the wind. Their creations were not merely decorative, but imbued with sacred meaning, embodying the refinement of skill and spirituality in a single shimmering breath. Far to the north and east, the nomadic Scythians of the steppe, also around 600 BC, adorned themselves with animal-style gold working that combined fierce vitality with technical mastery. Their gold plaques and appliques captured beasts in motion, stags leaping, eagles swooping, panthers twisting, rendered in low relief with chasing and hammering techniques that are now lost to time. Let us drift, ever so slowly, through the endless grasslands and into the tent of a Scythian chieftain, where golden regalia gleams softly in firelight, each piece telling stories of power, protection, and the natural world's fierce beauty. The subtle curves and tiny details of these objects speak of hands accustomed to both war and art, crafting pieces that were as much talismans as decoration, carrying the wild spirit of the steppe into moments of ceremony and rest. Around 500 BCE in Athens, artisans carefully employed the black figure vase inlay technique, a method where figures were painted in silhouette using a glossy black slip against the natural red clay of the vessel. The artists would then incise details into these dark shapes with fine tools, revealing the red beneath, while occasionally adding touches of white or purple for further nuance. This delicate dance between positive and negative space created narratives from mythology, daily life, and ritual, rendered with a quiet precision that allowed stories to emerge softly, like shadows flickering beside a hearth. Let us float gently onward, into the imagined studio, where the potter's wheel turns slowly, the brush dips into the slip with reverence, and the incising tool glides patiently, tracing muscles, folds of fabric, or the glint of an eye. Although later overtaken by the red figure technique, black figure vases remain a testament to the slow evolution of artistic language and human expression. Far across the seas, on the Korean peninsula around the same time, the Julmun pottery tradition quietly thrived. These Neolithic pots were decorated with comb-impressed and incised patterns, crafted by pressing tools with rows of teeth or simple pointed implements into the still soft clay. The repetitive motifs, zigzags, waves, dots, formed mesmerizing rhythms that once held meaning known intimately to their makers but now are partially lost to time. Let us take a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. The precise shape and material of these combs and incising tools remain an archaeological mystery, their fragments sparse, leaving us to imagine the feel of each impression, the texture left behind like the whisper of a passing breeze on moss. These patterns lent a tactile softness and visual quietude to the vessels, blending utility and artistry into one gentle whole. On the Indian subcontinent, around 400 BCE, early examples of classical rock-cut polychrome panel painting began to appear in sanctuaries carved into stone. These painted panels, nestled within cool rock recesses, were adorned with pigments mixed with now partly lost binders, which helped color adhere to the stone's porous surface. Let us drift, ever so slowly, Through the sanctuary's shadowed recesses, where faint hues, ochres, reds, and greens, still cling softly to walls, suggesting sacred stories and figures once vivid under flickering lamps. The gradual fading of these pigments over centuries has left much to scholarly reconstruction, but the quiet endurance of these paintings remains a tender reminder of the human impulse to decorate even the most permanent places. During the 3rd century BCE, the Roman Republic's wall painting styles, especially the Pompeian 1st and 2nd styles, demonstrated early attempts at illusionism. Walls were transformed into textured surfaces or simulated marble through stucco reliefs and painted trompe-l'oeil. Let us float gently onward, imagining a Roman artisan blending pigments with lime plaster, applying layers with slow, thoughtful strokes to mimic stone veining or architectural moldings. These methods, though eventually superseded by more refined frescoes, carry the soft resonance of human desire to bring complexity and depth to living spaces, where walls could whisper tales as silently as the stones themselves. Around 200 BCE in Gandhara, sculptors crafted Buddhist figures from stucco and chalk, blending Greco-Roman stylistic influences with Indian religious iconography. The modeling of these figures involved applying layers of stucco over core supports, then carving and smoothing to achieve lifelike softness and flowing drapery. Let us take a slow little detour into the studio, where hands press and coax shapes from wet plaster, capturing the serene gaze of the Buddha and the intricate folds of robes with meticulous care. Many workshops producing these sculptures declined over time, leaving behind fragments and faded echoes of a once vibrant artistic synthesis. In pre-contact North America, Native American artisans wove intricate basketry patterns using plant fibers, developing coiling techniques that produced both functional and ceremonial vessels. The motifs, geometric shapes, stylized animals, and symbolic forms, were stitched with precision, yet the meanings behind some of these patterns and the exact stitches employed have been partially lost. Let us drift, ever so slowly, to the gentle sound of fibers rubbing against each other, the subtle rhythm of hand and thread weaving a soft story into each basket. These vessels carry the quiet voice of culture, passed down through generations like a whispered lullaby, though some threads of understanding have slipped away into time's gentle embrace. At the dawn of the Roman Empire, around 1 CE, glassworkers mastered the delicate crafts of core forming and cameo carving. Core form glass involved shaping molten glass around a temporary core that was later removed, allowing vessels of varied shapes and colors to emerge with a translucent, almost ethereal quality. Cameo glasswork was created by layering differently colored glass and then carefully carving away outer layers to reveal contrasting hues beneath. Let us float gently onward, in a workshop filled with the soft hiss of hot glass and the cool touch of polished vessels, where artisans coaxed light and color into forms that shimmered with quiet elegance. These techniques required patience and subtle skill, many aspects of which faded as glassmaking evolved through the centuries. By 200 CE in Palmyra, ivory carvers produced high-relief works rich with local iconography, images of deities, processions, and ornate decorations carved into fine tusk surfaces. The carving required steady hands and sharp tools to coax depth and life from this delicate material. Let us take a slow little detour imagining the ivory's smooth surface, warmed gently by the carver's touch as each intricate detail was revealed in relief, the contrast of light and shadow playing softly on the polished curves. Political disruptions later suppressed these artistic traditions, leaving fragments of a luminous cultural past preserved only in silent shards. In the Mediterranean world of the 4th century CE, mosaic artists perfected the cutting of tesserae, small cubes of stone, glass, or ceramic, into precise shapes that fit together like the pieces of a slow-moving, luminous puzzle. Pigments and mortar recipes were finely tuned to enhance the interplay of light and color across surfaces depicting religious, imperial, or everyday scenes. Let us drift, ever so slowly, to the sound of tiny chisels tapping stone, the careful placement of each tessera in patterns that would catch candlelight and sunlight alike. Though these techniques gradually evolved and shifted in later centuries, the gentle glow of ancient mosaics remains a quiet testament to human patience and artistry. In Egypt, around the same time, Coptic weavers created tapestry panels combining wool and linen, producing bright, iconographic textiles with pattern sets that wove together sacred and everyday themes. The weaving techniques required careful control of tension and shuttle movement to bring the images alive, yet many of these patterns have faded from continued practice. Let us float gently onward, through a sunlit room where threads interlace in slow rhythm, the textures soft under hand and eye, the colors muted but still telling stories of faith and culture woven into cloth. Meanwhile, in Central Asia around 500 CE, the Sogdians painted narrative murals and silk textiles with styles distinctive to their region, blending influences from East and West. These vibrant paintings, once bright and detailed, have mostly faded or disappeared due to political upheavals. Let us take a slow little detour. Imagining the soft brushstrokes on delicate silk, the layering of pigments mixed with animal glue, the careful depiction of scenes from daily life, religion, and trade, all unfolding in a quiet interplay of color and form, now resting gently in the folds of history's fabric. Around 600 CE in Byzantium, artists were quietly shaping images with pigmented wax applied to wooden panels, a method known as encaustic painting. The wax, warmed and melted, was brushed onto the surface in layers, capturing the light with a soft translucence that gave icons a gentle inner glow. This technique, though eventually supplanted by egg tempera, carried with it a unique warmth and depth, each brushstroke embedding color within the wax like a memory preserved in amber. Let us float gently onward, into the slow, deliberate rhythm of the encaustic artist's work, where heated tools meld pigment and wax with careful precision, blending soft edges and subtle highlights. Few of the original recipes or exact methods have survived intact, leaving modern scholars to piece together the gentle secrets of this once vibrant craft. The quiet beauty of these early icons resonates still, their surfaces a tender reminder of both the sacred and the patient hands that made them. On the distant shores of Japan, around 700 CE during the Nara period, artisans were developing the delicate art of gesso lacquer relief. Layers of gesso, a mixture of powdered minerals and animal glue, were carefully built up on wooden surfaces to create low-relief decorations. These forms were then coated with lacquer, a natural resin that hardened to a glossy, protective finish. Let us take a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that these early polychrome gesso lacquer techniques laid the groundwork for the later, more refined maki-e method, in which gold and silver powders were sprinkled onto wet lacquer. Many of the local recipes for preparing gesso and lacquer mixtures have since been lost, veiling the original process in soft mystery. The slow layering of material and color speaks of a quiet devotion, where each relief element emerged like a gentle shadow rising from the surface, holding stories in its curves and textures. On the Korean peninsula around the same time, the Goguryeo kingdom's two murals whisper their ancient stories through colors and compositions whose exact pigments and methods are partially lost to us now. These paintings, found within stone chambers, depict dynamic scenes of mythology, daily life, and celestial beings with bold lines and vibrant hues. Let us float gently onward, to envision the tomb's quiet darkness where flickering lamplight would have revealed these murals' soft brilliance, their pigments mixed with natural binders now faded but once full of life. The specific materials and brush techniques remain partly elusive, a gentle puzzle for art historians who sift through fragments and traces like leaves on a forest floor. These murals capture the intimate intersection of belief and artistry, their quiet persistence through time an echo of the people who made them. In the heart of China's Tang dynasty, around 800 CE, woodblock printing blossomed into early polychrome forms that allowed multicolored images and sutra illustrations to be reproduced with careful registration of multiple carved blocks. Each color required a separate block, aligned precisely to layer pigments in harmonious sequence. Let us drift, ever so slowly, to the carved artisans, chiseling slowly into wooden blocks, their fingers steady as they prepare plates that would bring forth colors in quiet concert. The registration systems, the methods used to ensure colors lined up perfectly, were evolving during this period, requiring immense patience and skill. This slow process made mass production of images possible, yet each print carried the soft imprint of human hands and thoughtful craftsmanship, a gentle balance of repetition and variation. Far above the high plateaus of Tibet, early Bon practitioners prepared delicate painting grounds for Thangka murals using animal hide glues and sizing formulas now largely replaced or forgotten. The preparation of the surface was as vital as the painting itself, providing a smooth yet absorbent base that held pigments steady through centuries of ritual and reverence. Let us take a slow little detour to imagine the slow soaking and stretching of animal hides, their transformation into glue that would mix with mineral powders, creating a ground that could softly hold the spiritual imagery to come. Though later methods evolved and shifted, these early grounding techniques remain a quiet foundation beneath the layers of history and faith, a whisper of old hands shaping surfaces for sacred art. In the medieval Islamic world around 900 CE, potters developed the shimmering magic of lusterware, a technique where ceramics were coated with metallic overglazes that, through complex reducing firings and oxygen-poor kilns, produced surfaces gleaming with iridescent copper and silver hues. Let us float gently onward, into the gentle heat of the kiln, where glowing pots spun slowly, the chemical dance between glaze and atmosphere creating a soft metallic sheen. These recipes were region-specific and intricate, their secrets passing quietly through generations of artisans, but many now lost to time's slow passage. The lustered ceramics catch light as if holding a secret shimmer beneath their surfaces, embodying the patient alchemy of earth, fire, and human touch in a moment both delicate and enduring. Around 900 CE, in the cool forests and rocky landscapes of Scandinavia, the Vikings carved their stories and messages into standing stones known as runestones. Each stone was carefully selected for its flat surface, then marked with runic letters arranged according to regional layout traditions that varied widely. The carving process involved using chisels and hammers to incise the angular runes deeply into the stone, their forms echoing the sharp, linear nature of the script. Let us float gently onward into a quiet workshop where a craftsman taps rhythmically, flaking small chips away with patient care, the sound muted by moss and distant waves. Many local runic conventions, such as the placement of memorial texts or symbolic imagery like serpents and crosses intertwined with the letters, have since disappeared or shifted, leaving behind enigmatic inscriptions that require slow, careful interpretation. These stones were often set in prominent places, standing silent in the landscape as both memorials and markers, their carved letters weathered but still quietly speaking across the centuries. By 1000 CE, in the grand courts and sacred spaces of Byzantium, ivory diptychs were carved with exquisite detail to serve as portable devotional objects and ceremonial gifts. These miniature panels featured intricate reliefs of saints, emperors, and biblical scenes, carved with a sharpness that brought depth and texture to the smooth ivory surfaces. Let us take a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that many of these diptychs were broken apart or dispersed during the waves of iconoclasm, the religious conflicts that led to the destruction of many images, making surviving examples precious whispers of a lost tradition. The carvers worked with small, sharp tools to coax fine lines and delicate folds from the dense ivory, their skill evident in every curve and gesture. These ivory panels were not only religious artifacts but also statements of power and refinement, objects held in hands that moved slowly and reverently through rituals and ceremonies. Far away, in the maritime cultures of Southeast Asia around 1000 CE, artisans of the Srivijaya Empire created temple reliefs gilded with gold leaf over lacquer substrates. The technique involved applying thin layers of lacquer, a sap-based resin, to wooden or stone surfaces, then adhering sheets of gold leaf to create shimmering decorations that caught light softly in temple interiors. Let us drift, ever so slowly, through the humid air of tropical forests to a temple where glimmering reliefs tell sacred stories, their surfaces a delicate marriage of natural materials and human artistry. Many of these techniques have since vanished following cultural and political shifts, leaving only faint traces or written references. The layering of lacquer and gold was painstaking, requiring patience and steady hands, and the resulting surfaces held a quiet brilliance, like sunlight filtering through dense foliage. In Western Europe during the 1100s, Romanesque church walls became canvases for large-scale narrative murals painted with egg tempera on lime plaster. The tempera paint, made by mixing finely ground pigments with egg yolk, was applied in layers to carefully prepared plaster walls, creating images of saints, biblical stories, and symbolic figures that greeted worshippers with their solemn presence. Let us float gently onward into a dimly lit chapel where an artist's brush moves slowly over rough plaster, the egg tempera binding colors in thin, translucent veils. The pigment preparations and layering sequences used at this time are less common now, requiring specific knowledge of materials and timing to ensure longevity and vibrancy. These murals were meant to instruct and inspire in a language of soft colors and calm forms, enveloping the viewer in stories told through delicate brushwork and patient layering. Southeast Asia's maritime worlds around the 1100s also witnessed the use of pewter in casting and inlay for royal regalia, particularly in Malay regions. Early pewter working involved melting and casting an alloy of tin in small amounts of other metals, which was then sometimes inlaid into other metals to create intricate designs. Let us take a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many of the lost pewter inlay methods required precise temperature control and fine tools to embed the soft metal into harder surfaces, a delicate balance between heat and touch. Over time, these traditions were replaced by other metalworking styles, but the early forms represent a quiet chapter in the slow evolution of Southeast Asian craftsmanship, where the shimmer of pewter added a soft glow to objects of status and ceremony. Meanwhile, in Egypt around 1200 CE, the Coptic Christian community developed distinctive bookbinding techniques using chain-stitch sewing known as Copto-sewn codices. Unlike later Western bindings, these methods involved sewing gatherings of parchment or papyrus into leather or wooden covers using a sewing style that created flexible, durable spines. Let us float gently onward into a quiet scriptorium where scribes and binders worked with slow care, threading needles through layers of pages, their stitches forming neat, interlinked chains that allowed the books to open flat without cracking. These early bindings preserved texts through centuries and were important vessels of faith and knowledge. The particular chain-stitch signature remains a hallmark of Coptic craftsmanship, a soft thread connecting history, material, and the gentle turning of pages under tender hands. Around 1200 CE in the quiet forests and villages of northern Europe, artisans prepared polychrome timber sculptures with a delicate layering of materials that brought both color and gilded shimmer to wooden forms. The process began with applying specific gesso layers, a soft mixture of chalk and animal glue, that smoothed and sealed the wood's grain, creating a tender canvas for paint. Over this, bowl, a fine clay tinted red or yellow, was brushed on as a base for gold leaf application, giving the gilding warmth and depth. Let us float gently onward, imagining the slow, rhythmic brushing of these layers, each carefully dried and polished before the next, the gesso soft under finger and brush, the bowl's earthiness lending a quiet glow beneath the shimmering gold. Regional variations in recipes and layering sequences are pieced together today from fragments of old sculptures, revealing subtle differences across Northern Europe's workshops. This gentle layering created sculptures that seemed to breathe with a soft radiance, inviting quiet contemplation as light caught the gilded edges, shimmering like morning dew on moss. In the realm of Korea, the Goryeo dynasty around the same time witnessed the blossoming of the Sangam technique, an intricate celadon inlay process that involved carving delicate patterns into the smooth green glaze of celadon pottery and filling these grooves with white or black slips, liquid clays of contrasting colors. The result was a subtle, tactile pattern that seemed to float beneath the translucent glaze. Let us take a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that this method required not only skilled carving but precise control of kiln temperatures to ensure the inlaid slips bonded perfectly without cracking or discoloration. The Sanggon technique, a hallmark of Korean ceramic mastery, later transformed under Ming Dynasty influences, but in its early form, it represented a patient harmony between form, texture, and color. The slow firing process coaxed from earth and fire a quiet whisper of nature's soft hues, embodied in each vessel's smooth curves and gentle patterns. Moving west to Persia in the early 1300s, miniature painters prepared pigments with meticulous care, grinding minerals into powders finer than dust, then blending them with organic binders, such as gum arabic or egg whites, to achieve colors delicate enough for the smallest of details. Each artist often guarded personal recipes for these pigment glue mixtures, tailoring the consistency and transparency to suit the softness or sharpness required by their tiny compositions. Let us float gently onward into a dim studio where light filters softly through a window, illuminating tiny brushes that dance over vellum or paper, layering whispers of color to form scenes of gardens, courtly life, and celestial beings. Many of these painter-specific recipes have been lost over time, leaving behind only the luminous remnants of works that seem to glow quietly under the gaze. The blending of mineral and organic was a slow chemistry, a tender alchemy between earth and human hands, where the softness of binders held the hardness of mineral pigments in gentle balance. In the forests of Mesoamerica around 1300 CE, scribes and artists crafted folding bark books known as codices, made from amate paper, a soft, fibrous bark carefully beaten and prepared to receive paint and glyphs. These screenfold books unfolded like soft waves, their pages coated with lime wash to brighten the surface before the painstaking application of intricate glyphs and illustrations. Let us take a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that most original Mayan codices were destroyed, making surviving examples precious whispers of knowledge and tradition. The amate preparation involved soaking, beating, and drying the bark fibers, each step slow and deliberate to create a flexible yet durable surface. These codices carried stories, histories, and calendrical information, painted in vivid hues with natural pigments whose recipes and symbolism remain partially understood. Their folded form allowed them to be carried softly, like feathers in a breeze, passing through hands and generations with quiet reverence. In the prehistory of Southeast Asia, around 1300 CE, the Kokpanamdi archaeological site revealed gold beads strung with wire so fine it seemed spun from moonlight itself. These beads and granulated elements were threaded with incredible delicacy, the tiny gold wires twisted and connected in patterns that speak of highly developed metalworking skills. Let us float gently onward, imagining the slow, patient fingers bending the pliable metal, shaping granules that gleam faintly even after centuries beneath soil. These techniques, although rarely preserved in living craft lines, suggest a tradition of quiet mastery and refinement, where the shimmer of gold adorned bodies and soft celebration of status and ritual. The delicate stringing is a whisper of a vanished world where art and daily life merged gently beneath tropical canopies. In Italy, during the mid-1300s, fresco artists practiced secco painting, a technique of applying pigments mixed with binders onto dry plaster surfaces, layered above earlier buon fresco bases. This method allowed for richer colors and finer detail, but required careful layering of pigments and glue mixtures to adhere properly without flaking. Let us take a slow little detour into a sunlit workshop where painters gently brush tempera mixed with natural glues over roughened lime plaster, their strokes soft and patient, building depth and texture in quiet sequences. Although secco techniques gradually gave way to oil painting innovations, they formed a gentle bridge between medieval and Renaissance art, offering subtle nuances of color and form. The layering sequence, preparation of pigment mixtures, and timing of application all required calm expertise, creating surfaces that absorbed light like soft moss absorbs morning mist. Around 1400 CE in central Mexico, the Amanca artisans practiced the delicate and almost magical craft of feather mosaic, assembling tiny, iridescent feathers into ritual panels that shimmered softly in candlelight. These mosaics were created by carefully layering feathers from various birds, vivid hummingbirds, parrots, and others, onto surfaces coated with beeswax and plant-based glues, a slow and meticulous process requiring patience and gentle touch. Let us float gently onward into a quiet workshop where each feather is selected and placed with deliberate care, the softness of the feathers contrasting with the firm adhesive beneath. The resulting panels gleamed with shifting colors, a visual whisper of nature's subtle luminescence, used mostly in religious or ceremonial contexts. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that the technique was nearly lost after the Spanish conquest, as the colonial period disrupted many indigenous traditions and materials. What remains today is a soft echo, preserved in museums and rare restorations, a quiet testimony to a vanished world where feathers, glue, and devotion mingled in slow harmony. In West Africa, around the same time, the Yoruba people of Ife were casting naturalistic brass heads using the lost wax technique with local alloy recipes that created a unique metallic sheen and texture. The process involved sculpting a detailed wax model, then covering it with clay to form a mold. When heated, the wax melted away, allowing molten brass, carefully composed from regional metals, to flow into the cavity. Let us float gently onward into a cool studio where the glowing brass slowly fills the delicate molds, solidifying into faces of ancestors and kings with subtle, lifelike details. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that the specific metal alloys and wax formulas used changed gradually over centuries, making each cast a soft fingerprint of its moment in time. These brass heads carry a quiet dignity, their surfaces reflecting light with muted warmth, embodying the patient melding of art, ritual, and metallurgy. In Europe around 1450 CE, illuminated manuscript artists enhanced their sacred texts with gilding using shell gold, a pigment made by grinding gold into a fine powder mixed with gum or glue, and layering it delicately over bole, a clay base that gave warmth and adhesion to the precious metal. Let us float gently onward to a dim scriptorium where tiny brushes, barely thicker than a whisper, trace gold leaf and shell gold onto parchment, each stroke soft and deliberate. The bowl beneath was layered carefully to create the perfect cushion for gold, ensuring it would stick and shimmer softly over centuries. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many medieval gilding recipes survive only in fragments, leaving modern restorers to gently piece together the alchemy of materials and techniques. This slow layering created text and images glowing softly in candlelight, inviting silent reverence in quiet monasteries. Florence, Italy, also around 1450, witnessed the early emergence of pieter dure, a meticulous art of inlaying thin slabs of hardstone, like agate, jasper, and lapis lazuli, into marble panels and altarpieces. This slow craft required cutting stones into precise shapes that fit like delicate puzzle pieces, creating richly detailed and colorful images with smooth, polished surfaces. Let us float gently onward into a workshop filled with the quiet tapping of chisels and the gentle sanding of stone edges, each slab chosen for color and grain to blend into soft patterns of flora, fauna, or sacred iconography. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that these early pieter dure works paved the way for a highly refined Florentine tradition, continuing for centuries. The slow assembly of these panels feels like watching moss grow on stone, patient, quiet, and infinitely detailed, a tactile marriage of earth's hidden treasures. At the turn of the 16th century, European mappamondi, medieval world maps, were richly illuminated with pigments blended into iconographic scenes combining geography with allegory and mythology. The pigment mixtures were often locally sourced, with formulas that varied and softened over time, producing colors whose exact compositions have since lost their standardization. Let us float gently onward through parchment scrolls unfolding like soft waves, revealing continents and seas dotted with symbolic figures, monsters, kings, and saints, painted with pigments ground from minerals and plants. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that the iconographic vocabulary and color schemes carried meanings layered with spiritual and cultural nuance, slow stories told in pigments and brush strokes. These maps were not only navigational aids but meditative objects, their softly glowing colors inviting quiet reflection on the world's mysteries. In Anatolia, around 1500 CE, the Ottoman Iznik potters refined their underglaze palettes, developing early recipes for frit, glassy compounds fused during firing, that helped create vivid blues, reds, and greens on ceramics. Let us float gently onward inside a kiln-warmed workshop where painters carefully apply thin layers of pigment to smooth white slips before the final firing sealed the colors into brilliance. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that these early frit formulations were complex chemical recipes, evolving slowly as potters experimented with mineral sources and kiln atmospheres. The resulting ceramics held a soft, durable glaze whose color shimmered quietly under ambient light, a tactile connection between Earth's raw materials and human patience in crafting beauty through fire and glaze. Around 1500 CE in Europe, artisans devoted themselves to the slow, meticulous craft of bronze chasing and repoussé, a technique that involves shaping and detailing metal surfaces by hammering from both sides using specialized punches and tools. These punch tool sets were carefully designed for various delicate effects, some to create fine lines, others to push out soft reliefs, and some to stipple textures that catch light gently. Let us float gently onward into a quiet workshop where the soft tapping of tiny hammers rhythmically meets bronze, sending faint vibrations through the cool air. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that the knowledge of specific punch sequences and tool combinations was often closely held and passed down through master-apprentice relationships, meaning that many of these tool sets and techniques are now uncommon or lost. The slow layering of hammer blows and precise control transformed flat metal sheets into softly undulating, richly textured surfaces that shimmer with a gentle play of light, evoking forms both natural and ornate in their subtle complexity. In the high mountains of Tibet around 1520 CE, the Bonpo tradition nurtured the making of ritual masks imbued with layers of symbolic meaning, both in their paint and assembly. These masks were crafted from wood, lacquer, and cloth, then decorated with mineral pigments and natural dyes and colors whose exact compositions and methods are partly lost to time. Let us float gently onward into a serene, dimly lit shrine where artisans layer pigments with slow care, the brushes barely whispering across surfaces shaped to embody spiritual entities. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many of the ritualized assembly steps, like fastening sacred cords, layering protective substances, and invoking blessings during construction, were transmitted orally and have become fragmented. These masks held a quiet presence in ceremonies, their layered construction a tactile manifestation of ancient beliefs, moving gently with the breath of tradition even as some knowledge slips softly into the past. The Rikyu era in Japan, around 1550 CE, gave rise to early variants of raku pottery, deeply connected to the tea ceremony's aesthetics and philosophies. This pottery was hand-built rather than wheel-thrown, embracing irregular shapes and textures that reflected a quiet reverence for natural imperfection. Let us float gently onward to a humble kiln site where pots are gently lowered into combustible materials to undergo rapid cooling, creating crackled glazes and muted earth tones. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many kiln rites, including the precise timing and handling of these firings, were conveyed orally from master to apprentice, meaning regional variations developed softly and subtly over time. These tea objects are tactile whispers of wabi-sabi ideals, embodying the beauty found in slow, imperfect processes and the gentle embrace of nature's rhythms. By 1600 CE in South Asia, the Mughal courts adorned their palaces with shishai telamai, a decorative technique involving the inlay of small mirror glass pieces into stucco surfaces, creating reflective mosaics that caught light like soft flickers across a quiet room. Let us float gently onward through richly adorned chambers where artisans carefully cut tiny mirror fragments and adhered them with plant-based glues to wet plaster, forming delicate patterns that shimmer with a subtle, almost hypnotic glow. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that the specific cutting and adhesive recipes used in these mosaics have been rarely preserved intact, making authentic restoration a slow and challenging process. These reflective mosaics were not just decoration but played with light and shadow, inviting contemplative stillness as the soft glints flickered quietly on walls and ceilings. In the regions of Mali and Burkina Faso around 1600 CE, the Taiwara festival featured masks that combined finely wrought iron elements with woven fibers, creating hybrid objects of ritual significance whose crafting methods have largely faded. Let us float gently onward into the dappled shade of a savanna village where blacksmiths and weavers work side by side, their tools moving with slow precision to shape iron rods into delicate frameworks while fibers are braided and woven to complete the forms. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that the fusion of metalwork and weaving in these masks was tied to festival customs that have quietly disappeared, leaving few living examples of the exact techniques. These masks embodied the slow dance of Earth's raw materials and human hands, a soft interplay between strength and flexibility, metal and fiber, ritual and craft, a whisper of vanished celebrations carried gently on the breeze. Around 1650 in Italy, artists undertook the slow, patient craft of quadratura, a Baroque ceiling painting technique that created stunning illusions of architecture, tricking the eye with foreshortening and perspective to make ceilings appear open to the sky or extended by columns and arches. Let us float gently onward, imagining painters suspended carefully on scaffolds, scaffolding designs now mostly lost, where they applied layers of plaster and pigments with precise calculation. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these lost scaffolding methods were vital, not just for access, but for achieving the exact vantage points needed to perfect the illusion from below. The process required quiet mastery of geometry and visual trickery, where every brushstroke was a soft whisper shaping perceived space. The ceilings, transformed into ethereal visions, offered viewers a slow, endless upward gaze as if the architecture itself was breathing and stretching into a dreamlike sky, inviting gentle wonder and calm. In Europe around the same time, miniature portrait enamels on vellum or metal demanded extraordinary delicacy and precision, where tiny faces and details were painted with fine brushes and fused in carefully controlled kiln firings. Let us float gently onward into a dim studio warmed by the soft glow of a kiln, where artisans patiently applied layers of powdered glass mixed with pigments, waiting for each to melt and fuse into luminous colors. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that the precise kiln sequences, the timing, temperature, and atmosphere, were crucial to avoid cracking or discoloration, making this a craft as much about chemistry as artistry. These miniature portraits, no larger than a finger's nail, hold soft histories whispered in tiny brushstrokes, capturing expressions with quiet intimacy, inviting viewers to linger in stillness and gentle curiosity. Further east in Southeast Asia around 1700, traditional lacquer and resin layering on wood surfaces created smooth, lustrous finishes prized in Myanmar and Thailand. This process involved applying many thin coats of lacquer, made from the sap of native trees, mixed with plant-based resins, each layer carefully dried and polished before the next. Let us float gently onward into humid workshops fragrant with earth and resin, where artisans patiently build up surfaces that feel like softly hardened liquid glass. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: that exact curing regimes, how long each layer dried, environmental humidity, and resin mixtures, were locally specific secrets, passed gently through generations. This slow layering created durable, tactile surfaces that shimmer quietly under soft light, objects carrying the warmth of time and the hands that shaped them. Across the North American continent around 1700, indigenous peoples used complex cordage binding techniques made from sweetgrass and bulrush fibers to construct planked and bark canoes. These bindings held hulls together with resilience and flexibility, designed to withstand gentle river currents and soft waves. Let us float gently onward, imagining the slow weaving and wrapping of supple grasses, hands moving with practiced rhythm and patience, the natural fibers bending without breaking. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: that many of these binding patterns and stitch techniques declined sharply with the advent of industrial materials like nails and synthetic ropes, quietly fading from living memory. The softly woven canoes carried people gently across still waters, a tactile harmony between plant, water, and human care, a slow dance of craft and nature whispered through ripples. In Europe around 1750, delicate Rococo ornamentation took form in lightweight papier-mâché, molded into intricate, curving decorations for furniture and mirrors. Artisans mixed starch-based pastes and carefully layered paper pulp into molds, building shapes that were both strong and feather-light. Let us float gently onward into airy workshops where soft molds captured swirls, shells, and floral motifs, the papier-mâché slowly drying to reveal delicate forms that seemed almost to breathe beneath their fragile surfaces. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: that this method was gradually abandoned as heavier, more durable materials became favored, leaving papier-mâché decorations as quiet, ephemeral relics of a lighter past. These soft, molded forms caught light with gentle shadows, inviting quiet contemplation of craft's fleeting beauty. By 1760, the courts of France and Europe performed Baroque court ballet variants, highly codified dances filled with ornamental steps and elaborate visual pageantry. These dances, slow and formal, unfolded like living tapestries, each movement deliberate and loaded with symbolic meaning. Let us float gently onward into grand halls where dancers moved with measured grace, their footsteps echoing softly across polished floors as they enacted rituals of status and elegance. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: that many of these court dance styles were supplanted over time by modern ballet, meaning their original choreography and nuances survive mostly in faint written records and occasional reenactments. These slow dances were quiet ceremonies, blending movement and decorum in a soft celebration of order and tradition, inviting viewers to lose themselves gently in rhythm and ritual. Around 1770 in Hawaii, the creation of kapa bark cloth unfolded as a slow and tender craft, where walk bark was carefully stripped, soaked, and beaten to create large, soft sheets of cloth. These cloths were then patterned with natural dyes extracted from local plants, creating designs that whispered stories and meanings through their intricate, often geometric or symbolic motifs. Let us float gently onward into a quiet open space where artisans worked patiently, their hands moving rhythmically to soften the bark fibers beneath wooden beaters, transforming rough strips into smooth fabric. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many of the pre-contact patterns were suppressed after colonization, gently fading from practice as new influences and restrictions softly crept in. The remaining kapa cloth pieces are tactile echoes of this past, their subtle patterns holding the soft breath of ancient islands and slow-moving tides, inviting calm reflection beneath gently swaying palms. In Europe, around 1780, the mezzotint printmaking process used copper plates and specialized rockers to create images rich with tonal gradations, made possible by grinding and roughening the metal surface with burrs. Let us float gently onward to a quiet print studio, where an artisan's hands gently manipulate a rocker tool across a copper plate, slowly roughening it with a rhythmic, whispering motion. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that the mezzotint technique's tonal quality depended heavily on the artist's skill in controlling how much of the burr was left unpolished, allowing for soft transitions between dark and light areas, creating images that felt like soft shadows held still. This printmaking method requires patience and an intimate understanding of tools, yet the specialized knowledge has become rare as newer printing technologies replaced these slow, tactile techniques. Each mezzotint print holds a quiet depth, like a dream slowly coming into focus under a gentle morning light. Around 1790 in Japan, the textile art of shibari involved resist-dyeing cloth with stitching, folding, and binding methods that varied softly by region and family tradition, creating intricate patterns on kimono fabrics. Let us float gently onward into a dimly lit room where fingers quietly stitch fine threads and wrap fabric tightly, preparing it to resist dye in deliberate, yet almost meditative ways. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many of these pre-industrial, region-specific shibari variants have become uncommon, as mass production and modern fabrics softly replaced handcrafted methods. The delicate patterns produced through these bindings and stitches catch dye unevenly, resulting in soft-edged, organic shapes that whisper slow tales of fabric, water, and color melding gently over time. The slow artistry of shibari invites quiet attention to the passing of dye and the touch of human hands over cloth, a slow unfolding of visual texture like moss growing on an ancient stone. In France and Europe, around 1800, the daguerreotype process marked one of the earliest forms of photography, relying on hand-polishing silvered copper plates to a mirror finish and applying delicate toning recipes to develop subtle images. Let us float gently onward into a shadowed studio filled with a faint metallic scent of silver and chemicals, where artisans polish plates with slow, circular motions, coaxing surfaces to a soft glow that will hold captured light. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that the hand toning methods, often using gold chloride or other chemicals, were applied with brushes or cloths in careful passes, imbuing the plates with warm hues and enhancing the image's gentle depth. These finishing steps required quiet patience, as imperfect polishing or uneven toning could dull the delicate image, and the detailed recipes have since been lost or transformed with later photographic advances. Each daguerreotype is a quiet silver whisper, holding shadows and light caught in time's slow breath. In the Himalayan region around 1810, Bhutanese monks and artists crafted Thangka paintings with painstakingly ground mineral pigments in gilded details, working in cloistered ateliers where recipes for these materials varied gently between workshops. Let us float gently onward through a hushed monastery studio scented faintly of earth and incense, where pigments made from crushed stones and minerals are slowly mixed with binders, creating soft powders that will become vibrant color on cloth. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that the specific gilding techniques, applying gold leaf or powder to delicate lines, were closely guarded and passed quietly among artists, and some of these methods have softened into obscurity over generations. The resulting Thangkas glow softly with sacred imagery, their mineral hues and gold accents inviting prolonged, gentle contemplation, like light filtering through mist over quiet mountain slopes. By 1820, shadow puppet carving in Indonesia and Malaysia used regionally distinct woods and paints for wayang kulit, alongside carefully tanned hides and hand-forged hinges that allowed puppets to move gracefully during performances. Let us float gently onward to a workshop where hands carve thin leather panels with fine knives, the slow shaping of delicate forms creating a tactile connection between craft and story. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that the specific recipes for hide tanning and hinge making were often secret and local, many of which have gently slipped away as traditional puppetry waned in popularity. These puppets carry the slow rhythm of performance tradition, casting soft shadows that flicker quietly in candlelit rooms, where the dance of light and dark invites a gentle, drifting reverie. In France and Europe by 1830, marqueterie artisans crafted boule veneer inlays and applied vernis martin, a French varnish known for its deep gloss and durability, onto fine furniture surfaces. Let us float gently onward into elegant workshops where thin wood veneers are cut and assembled with soft precision, forming intricate patterns that catch light with delicate warmth. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that original vernis martin recipes, made from shellac and natural resins, are only partially known today, and restorers work carefully to replicate its soft, luminous finish. This combination of marqueterie and varnish produces surfaces that invite the fingers to linger, their gentle sheen a slow testament to centuries of quiet craftsmanship. Around 1840 in Europe, lithographic printing involved preparing smooth limestone surfaces by grinding and polishing, then drawing with greasy crayon mixes that varied softly by workshop and artisan. Let us float gently onward through dusty studios where stones are slowly ground to a fine, velvety texture, waiting to receive delicate images that will print softly onto paper. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that these crayon mixtures, combining waxes, oils, and pigments, were recipes evolving gradually with industrialization, leading to subtle changes in print texture and quality. Lithography's tactile intimacy between stone and hand makes each print a quiet, slow impression of image and craft, inviting viewers to rest in its gentle marks, like the soft imprint of a feather landing on moss. Around 1850, in the Indian subcontinent, the slow and meticulous craft of kalamkari block printing unfolded as artisans pressed hand-carved wooden blocks onto cloth, transferring patterns with natural dyes made from plants and minerals. Let us float gently onward into shaded studios where fragrant mordants like alum and iron were softly prepared and applied to textiles, coaxing colors to settle and transform with subtle variations. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that many traditional vegetal dye recipes, rich with indigo, madder, and pomegranate, dwindled quietly as synthetic dyes softly emerged during industrialization, altering the gentle rhythm of natural color making. The block prints, layered with complex hues, shimmered quietly beneath soft daylight, each impression a slow conversation between hand, wood, and fiber, inviting viewers to drift into the rich history embedded in every subtle line and hue. By the 1860s, maritime communities developed the intricate, delicate art of scrimshaw, tiny engravings carved into whalebone and ivory by sailors during long voyages. Let us float gently onward into the dim light of a ship's cabin where a sailor's hands, steady but slow from days at sea, carefully incised stories, ships, and scenes onto smooth bone surfaces with fine needles and blades. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that the practice of scrimshaw softened and declined as whaling itself diminished, causing many of these micro-engraving traditions to fade into quiet memory. These delicate carvings are tactile whispers of distant oceans and slow, lonesome journeys, holding the silent passage of time like a softly turning gear beneath the waves. In Europe and America during the 1870s, a unique form of sentimental craft took shape, hairwork jewelry, where human hair was woven and sealed into intricate patterns forming bracelets, brooches, and keepsakes tied closely to mourning rituals. Let us float gently onward into a quiet parlor where strands of hair, carefully collected and sorted, are gently braided and woven into delicate frames, then encased under glass or metalwork with slow, patient sealing techniques. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that this art form, now rare, was once a widespread tactile memory-keeping practice, offering a soft, physical connection to loved ones long past, like a quiet thread linking past and present. The shimmering hair patterns catch light with muted warmth, inviting gentle remembrance and whispered stories shared in silent rooms. Around 1880 in Europe, the Art Nouveau movement embraced the delicate technique of glass cameo layer etching, where artisans layered molten glass and carved intricate designs through acid etching and cutting, revealing soft contrasts between layers. Let us float gently onward into luminous studios warmed by the glow of furnaces, where glassmakers patiently build and shape multi-layered vessels or panels, then slowly carve or etch away surfaces to reveal graceful patterns of nature-inspired curves and motifs. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that coordinating the furnace temperatures with the acid etching timing required quiet, precise knowledge, passed down softly among artisans, many of whom guarded their exact recipes. The resulting glass pieces hold a dreamy depth, like light filtered through slowly drifting clouds, inviting calm focus on their softly unfolding forms. In the Appalachian region of the United States around 1880, localized ballad singing traditions thrived, each community nurturing its own variations of narrative songs and ornamentations, passed gently through generations before commercial recordings began to standardize repertoires. Let us float gently onward to mountain porches and quiet gatherings where voices rise softly in the evening, telling stories steeped in history and personal memory. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that many subtle regional idiosyncrasies, like unique melodic turns and lyrical phrases, began to disappear as recordings spread, smoothing out the rich texture of local song traditions. These ballads, woven with slow rhythms and gentle ornamentation, invite the listener to drift through valleys of time, their soft cadences a lullaby carried on the cool evening air. By the late 19th century, around 1890, the early motion picture industry used hand-colored frame painting to bring silent films to life with subtle hues applied frame by frame using dyes and stencils. Let us float gently onward into dim editing rooms where workers delicately brush colors onto thousands of tiny frames, their hands moving slowly and carefully to avoid smudges or fading. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that these hand-coloring methods gave way to photographic color processes within a few decades, quietly shifting the craft into history's gentle shadow. Each colored frame is a tiny window, a softly glowing fragment of moving light that invites viewers to drift alongside flickering images, held gently in time's slow embrace. In Europe and the Levant around 1890, the art of cautery, hand-stitched horsetail and horsehair tasselwork, decorated court garments and furniture with intricate, fine tassels and passementerie. Let us float gently onward to workshops where skilled hands slowly entwine strands of horsehair and silk threads into delicate tassels, each stitch a whisper of refined luxury and tradition. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that industrialization's rise softened demand for these slow, handcrafted embellishments, leading to the gradual disappearance of many regional cautery techniques. The tassels, light as floating feathers, once trimmed the edges of royal attire and ornate furnishings, offering a tactile, slow-moving dance of texture and light that lingers quietly in history's soft folds. And perhaps, this is all we need to know tonight. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, Then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.